Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Christina Vincent. I am the Redevelopment Program Administrator for the City of Fort Collins Urban Renewal Authority. We've got a really great presentation for you, and at this time I would like to welcome our new mayor, Karen Wykenot.
I am so excited to be here. This is my very first special event, and you get to hear it. Plus, it's also my first day reporting for duty as president of the Urban Renewal Authority. So it's really exciting. And the other part is looking out at all the familiar faces that have been engaged in the development of Fort Collins and moving forward. It's just exciting that I am able to recognize today the efforts of the hard work and planning that result in real projects in the development partnerships citywide. Back in the 1990s, I was president of the North Fort Collins Business Association, and we as businesses began this process of redevelopment, looking for change with the creation of the North College Urban Renewal Plan. That was the beginning of how do you change by planning. And then we've got the North College Plan that came into place later on. Now, 20 years later, the change is finally happening that began so long ago. I just couldn't be more excited and proud of what has transpired in this city. It's inspiring to see the public and private partnerships that we've been able to achieve in just the last 5 years alone. As a small business owner, I have a great appreciation for economic strategy that seeks out these types of key partnerships. That's why you're here today for this luncheon. You are the key partners in making this happen. The city or the URA cannot do the redevelopment by itself. We need advocates, we need partners, friends to share that common vision and work together to overcome the hurdles that impede the success of the economic landscape. I personally understand that we need to retain our businesses and allow them to expand and grow and incubate promising new startups and to attract new businesses to our city. I would like to share with you just what I think is the finest example of the work that we can do together. And it's just one of the stories that I think is a great model for the whole community that serves with partnerships. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Valley Steel and Wire Company, but it's one that I was engaged with all along. A small, successful business that had been in Fort Collins over 45 years. And it was nestled in the little area along Hickory Street. Most of us never even knew it was there. Valley Steel and Wire Company is a wholesale operation, primarily receiving steel goods that come by rail, and then they distribute the products within the region, a tri-state region. In 2005, they were feeling success and needed to grow. They proposed to build an addition, a new 19,000 square foot warehouse to be added to what was there on a 3-acre parcel. Here's where the story is that many of you are probably familiar with. There was no public sewer line on Hickory. As many of you know, the developer anywhere in the city is required to install sewer along its parcel frontage, even though the project didn't necessarily need sewer. Remember, this was just a warehouse. Didn't need the sewer, but the requirement was there. In this case, Valley Steel needed to add 800 feet of sewer length. That sewer requirement added 17% to the cost estimates on the addition, and at that time it was approximately $150,000. Without relief from this expense, Valley Steel was considering to leave Fort Collins to a more economically competitive location in the region, even though they really would rather have done business here. Fortunately for Valley Steel, in September 2005, it became the first project funded by a public-private partnership of the North College Urban Renewal Authority. Today, Valley Steel is with us, thriving and successful because we eliminated the major obstacle to development as partners. I love that story. I think it's just great for all of us in this community. Your attendance here today to participate and learn about the progress of some of our city initiatives shows me that you too are dedicated to quality development in our community and that partnerships are a viable direction for economic development. Thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this really special occasion. I look forward to the partnership with all of you in the near future.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I would just like everyone to know who is in the room as far as the city is concerned, so that you kind of know. You may not know everyone that you're sitting next to, but you are represented by economic health, planning, utilities, the city manager's office, and more. So if you're a city staffer, would you mind just raising your hand for a moment? Great, thank you. I'd also like to recognize Council District 1 Councilmember Ben Manville. He's here in attendance. Ben really participates in our North Fort Collins Business Association, the Citizen Advisory Group for the URA, and is really instrumental into some of the URA projects and giving feedback and understands tax increment financing. So we're really glad that you came today, Ben. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mike Freeman, Chief Financial Officer for the City of Fort Collins, to come up.
Thanks, Christina. I know probably most of the people in the room, which is great. And what kind of struck me walking in here today was just 5 years ago, the city formally put an economic health program in place. And it kind of events like this really kind of made me go back in time and remember that time period of the council that initiated an economic development program brought me into help that get up and running. And in 5 years, I think the progress that's been made is just phenomenal. I've gone from myself being the principal kind of person in terms of economic health, although obviously I don't do anything individually at all at the city. I mean, it's the whole team here represented. But Josh then came on board. We really started looking kind of long term at how we were going to execute on our economic strategy, and then had some somewhat difficult conversations with Joe, I'll be honest, about the role that the urban renewal is playing in economic development. We had a really good dialogue and made a decision that the urban renewal activity really fit better from an economic strategy, in the economic health group itself. Since then, we've completed one blight study at the mall. We have another blight study that's done but not adopted that will turn on an urban renewal authority area for Prospect. I think most people in the room are familiar with what's going on in Midtown, but just think about that progress in really just a couple of short years. And then you couple all the other things that are going on around business expansion, retention, our incubation program. So there's a lot of activity, and I think we've really built a really strong, solid team. One of the things I just wanted to highlight real quick is that the council funded, as part of the Keep Fort Collins Great tax increase and economic strategic plan update. That's not exactly what we're going to call it. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but we've had an economic strategy in place since I came in initially about 5 years ago, and it's really time to really refresh that strategy. I don't think fundamentally a lot of the core things will change around urban renewal and our cluster strategy and things like that, but it's really time to take a really hard critical look at what we've been successful doing, what hasn't worked so well, and then put a plan in place for the next 4 to 6 years. So that'll be happening this year. It's a very, very big project for us, and we'll be kicking that off with City Council next month in May. And I guess the last point I want to make is that part of one of our adopted strategies around economic health is partnering, and I think Fort Collins has done an extremely good job doing that. Not only partnering with organizations, the kind of typical organizations, if you will, like Downtown Development Authority, CSU, but also with you. I mean, I think, looking around the room, pretty regular contact between myself, Christina, or Josh with virtually everybody in this room. And And that's part of that partnering is you know us, we know you. You know who to call if you need, if you have an issue. And what I'm really looking forward to is, particularly as the Midtown process starts to wrap up, really how do we start that whole redevelopment on that corridor? It's a hugely important opportunity area for the city. And as the mayor mentioned, it really has nothing to do with the city. We're not property owners. It's going to totally rely on you all as brokers, property owners, and developers to really bring projects forward and for us to collaborate and get those done. And that's what I'm really excited about, because that's what at the end of the day is really rewarding about this work, is seeing really hard projects get done, come out of the ground and get done. And that's what we want to be really focusing on in 2011 and 12. So with that, Christine, I'll turn it back over to you, and really appreciative that you're here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So just to run through kind of the agenda today, we're going to first talk about the North College Urban Renewal Plan project updates, where we are with it, what's happened in the first 5 years. I'd also like to mention we do have the URA annual report up here at the front table, so if you didn't get a chance to grab one, you're interested, feel free to take one on your way out. The next item is the Mason Corridor. Helen Mickelbrink will be giving that update and talk to you a little bit about the next steps, timeline, and probably some of that information that you may or may not already know. After that, Megan Bolin is going to give a presentation on the Midtown Existing Conditions Survey, just a real high-level overview, but I'd like to share with you that entire document, if you so have the need to read the entire thing, is available on the URA's website, renewfortcollins.com. After that, we'll talk a little bit about Prospect South and the momentum there, as well as the timeline. Josh Burks will give an update on Foothills Mall and the discussions going on there. And then Steve Dush will wrap up with the sustainable, predictable, flexible planning tool and kind of explain the necessity behind that. And really, we're going to ask for feedback on that specific topic. We'll hand out a survey at that time. We'd really like that to be an interactive conversation. So that's kind of the high-level overview, and I'll go ahead and get started with the North College Urban Renewal Plan area. So to date, in the last 5 years, we have committed to several public improvements. You can see the long list there, but I think the quick facts are the most important part. There's $80 million of both public and private investment going on in North College right now. That's secured funding, projects that are either completely built, in the process of being built, or will start construction this summer. That is, from a URA perspective, $14 million in tax increment financing grants. Some of that money hasn't been given out yet, but some of it has, and so those that are underway and completed have their funding, and those that have just started won't receive it until after the construction is complete. What those projects will generate, and I'll show you a map in a moment of what all those projects are, but they'll generate $26 million in tax increment financing. That 5 years ago, that funding wasn't there. And so it's really incredible to see the momentum and the development that is occurring in the right places, in the right needs for the community, that are driving the additional increment that will then generate larger plan area improvements. So with that, this is a map. Aerials are typically hard to see on PowerPoint, but North College Marketplace up there on the corner. If you haven't been to College and Willits in a while, it's time for you to leave Northside Oslan Center at the end of this presentation and head on north for 5 minutes and just take a look at everything that's going on. College and Willits intersection was improved. That's completely done. King Soopers external is finished, and they're internal and looking to open on June 1st. And that's exciting. They're working on some of the external buildings. Union Place across the street just has the infrastructure in, but again, that's dirt that moved last year in 2010, so you can see how the site plan would lay out once vertical construction occurs. Kaufman and Robinson, I would really encourage you to swing by this building. So you leave North College Marketplace after you've driven down the roundabout, headed east on Willits. You turn right on Blue Spruce, and then suddenly you're at Kaufman and Robinson's new building that looks amazing. This is a locally owned business that has a little 5,000 square foot light industrial ion sources building that they are outgrowing where they were. And so now their 10,000 square foot, almost LEED certified, really architecturally sound building is complete, and really it's a good asset and aesthetic value to Blue Spruce. So I would encourage you to go check that one out too. Valley Steel is, again, the mayor mentioned this was our first project out of the chute. They are still continuing to grow and do business as usual. Nothing really to see there other than to know it's great to know they're still in business and they're able to be successful. Jack's, most of us enter Jack's on the west entrance off of College, and they just did an expansion on the east side. They created a new east entrance, and they expanded their retail space by about 25%. So if you haven't gone into the new parts of Jack's, I would encourage you to go check that out. The URA participated in some of the local street portion and street oversizing funding for that project. And last, Rocky Mountain Innosphere. I know a lot of you in the room have probably been to that building. The grand opening was a month and a half ago now, and just a great asset to our community, the incubation, everything that comes in and out of that building from an economic development strategy, as well as just an asset it is to North College and Vine Drive, and kind of that instead of being an old waste management site, you now have a 3-story LEED Platinum building. So with that, that's all of the projects we have to share with you on North College. Just to talk to you a little bit about some of the URA communications, what's happened in 2010 leading into 2011. In 2010, the URA board completely revamped the policies and procedures. And basically what that does is it makes it easier for applicants like yourselves and staff to work together and know what's expected, know what qualifies as development, what the eligible goals are, and then it lists out kind of the steps. And so what I did today was just put up the steps. If you were to come and apply for tax increment financing in an urban renewal plan area, it's 5 easy steps, and this one relates specifically to North College. Step 4 is attending the CAG meeting and then also getting a CAG recommendation. CAG stands for the Citizen Advisory Group that is nominated or elected from the North Fort Collins Business Association to then give input onto urban renewal plan area projects just in North College. So again, we go from submit your application, you work with staff, we do a but-for test, which is basically what's the economics, what's the financial feasibility of the project, going into then a full staff recommendation, and then we take it to the URA board for final approval. Something else to mention too is that the website has been completely revamped. So some of you were able to go onto the website to get the information for today, but click around, and it's really a great asset. If there's something missing you think should be on there, please just shoot me an email. My contact information's on there. I'd be happy to know how we can improve it, but we're really excited that it has all the information you would need from start to finish regarding the Urban Renewal Authority and the projects to date and kind of their quick fact sheets. There's a lot about TIF. If you're not 100% sure of how tax increment financing works, there's diagrams and frequently asked questions, and so it's supposed to be a resource really for you to interact. So I'd love the feedback. If there's something missing or a document that you used to see that isn't there anymore, let me know that. With that, that's a real quick overview of North College. There's projects that are constantly in discussion, and there's still a lot going on specific to North College, especially with the road improvements starting late this summer from Vine Drive all the way up to the Hickory Conifer intersection. And so with that, I'll leave North College alone, and I will invite Helen Mickelbrink up here to talk to you about Mason Corridor.
Hi, I'm Helen Mickelbrink. I am the city engineer with Fort Collins. I've been here about 3 years. I came from Vail, where I was there for about 10 years, so I kind of have to readjust to the weather, but today I felt like I was at home with the spring snowstorm. This is an interesting segue into talking about Mason Corridor. Just for a point of information, my department's in charge of all the capital construction in the city, all the horizontal construction. So we are in charge of the North College improvements. The ones that you saw done already at College and Willix, we completed in October of this year. And we are working on starting the next phase of improvements, as Christina pointed out, from Vine to Conifer. And we also recently received funding, thanks to our friends at the MPO and Ben Manville, for almost $2 million to start the design of the next piece that will go from Vine to Willix. Okay, so Mason Corridor. This is a project that has been in planning for almost 15 years. Most of our projects aren't that long, but there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of anticipation
And I am an extremely conservative person. I was put in charge of the project about a year ago because it was finally time to build it. And we had two major hurdles that we had to overcome. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But I think what I really want to share with you today is where we're going and how soon we're going to get there and how soon the Mason Corridor is going to become part of the fabric of the city of Fort Collins. I'm thinking many of you know that it's more than just a transportation corridor, although it's going to be the coolest transportation corridor in the state of Colorado, I'll have you know, like none other. We're actually racing the Roaring Fork Valley to get ours in first. I visited with them a couple weeks ago just to assure that we're still on track to beat them, and we are. So it's all good. This is a look at what the bus is going to look like, although it won't look exactly like this one. But it's an articulated bus, which means it has that accordion in the middle. They're 60 feet long. They'll be run by compressed natural gas. And the beauty of this system is that there's going to be a much higher frequency. We're looking at 10-minute headways, meaning that buses come every 10 minutes, as opposed to our current system in transport. It's like a half an hour to an hour, depending. The bus I take actually from LeMay it only goes on 1 hour intervals. So we're going to be working on the east-west corridors, trying to get that, feeding them into Mason. But when Mason hits the ground in 2013, you will see that type of frequency of service. We're in the process of purchasing 6 of these buses. The really cool thing about these buses is you can bring your bikes right on. Our handicapped friends will be able to put their wheelchairs immediately on the bus. We won't have to have that ramping situation that any of you who take the bus know. There's a docking port where they'll be able to secure. So the entire operation is faster, it's more efficient, and it looks and feels like light rail. This is the corridor. We start at the downtown transit center that many of you are familiar with. We're actually going to have a station there. We had to, because of the articulated bus, we have a turning movement problem. So we're actually going to have a stop at the South Transit Center that's out on Mason Street. That's in design right now. That's kind of a late breaking thing that had to do with the way we're operating the system. But as you look and you head south, we have a number of stations downtown. And then we move along through the university. We've been working hand in glove with the university staff, their architects, their planning staff, because the university station itself is going to be the highest ridership. So it's going to be the largest station. It's going to be a huge gathering place on campus. So I just thought I'd point that out. This is just a quick look at the different cross sections. To understand the way the Mason Corridor works, you will leave the downtown transit center heading south on Mason Street, which will now be a two-way traffic. If you did it today, it would be somewhat of a problem as you headed south. One thing I'd like to point out for all you cyclists out there, really nice that we're going to have two-way traffic on Mason Street and two-way bike traffic, so that we'll now have a way to get south legally rather than on College. You can't ride on the sidewalks, you can't ride on the streets. This is what the cross sections look like. It'll be in mixed traffic until it gets to Laurel. At Laurel, there will be a diagonal movement that puts it on what we call a fixed guideway. That fixed guideway will run essentially all the way south to Harmony, where it will hook up with the new South Transit Center. So this just shows you the 3 different configurations that you'll see along the corridor. This is a rendering of the South Transit Center. This is completely designed. It is our goal to build the South Transit Center, start as early as this year, but it'll probably be early 2012. Right now we're figuring out how all the components come together. There's been a lot of citizen outcry for us to build the Mason Corridor overpass, which is right by the NRRC and Whole Foods. And I'm going to try to advance that element so we start that this fall, because there's so much controversy around the people trying to cross the railroad tracks, and we've had to fence it off due to railroad regulations. So that's just one of the elements we'll be working on. We will be coming out with another open house this summer to share the construction schedule so that everybody's on board. One of the first things you're going to see happen this summer is we're going to start the conversion of Mason Street. It's very complicated, far more than you would think, than just going out, switching the heads around and restriping it. There's a lot more to it. The railroad is going to replace its tracks, and I'd invite anybody who's interested in that sort of thing to come down. They're going to pull them out, and then they have like an extruding machine that puts it all in one piece. Really cool. If you're an engineer, you really like this stuff. Lest we digress. House Street is already converted, as many of you know, and running really well. Mason will be under construction for a period this summer into the fall, and then it'll continue next year. We will be opening up the ballast, meaning that you'll see those rocks in between all the intersections. All the intersections will be improved with panels so that it'll be a nice soft movement. There will be signals, many more signals downtown, no more gates, but more signals to assure safety for the trains, the buses, and the public. We will get under construction, full construction of the guideway, early 2012, and we start service in December of 2013. These are just the next steps that we have to do. The one that I took off there today that I was so excited about is the BNSF agreement. About 2 weeks ago, we got that signed. This was an absolute major hurdle. It would have made or broken the project. We worked hand in hand with these people. I don't care what anybody of you think about the railroads because they get a bad reputation. They were wonderful to work with. We got a good, fair deal for the city and for the railroad. It's going to be safer, and we're going to coexist in one corridor. It's a deal that they have not given very many cities. So the city of Fort Collins can be extremely proud that we're going to have this. Other than that, that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm here. If you have any questions on any of our other construction projects, the 392 interchange, various bridges that we're doing in town, you know how to get a hold of me. I'm the city engineer with Fort Collins. Thank you.
Hey, hello everybody. My name is Megan Bolin. I'm a city planner with Fort Collins, working with the Economic Health and Urban Renewal Authority. So our next agenda item, we are going to talk about the Midtown Existing Conditions Survey. Many of you may recall and may have been involved in the Midtown redevelopment study that was recently completed by the city last year. That study, the purpose of it was to assess the economic conditions and opportunities of the Midtown commercial corridor, which included the basically south of College from Prospect down to Harmony. That report included a list of implementation actions that identified some next steps in order to catalyze and foster some redevelopment activity along the corridor, and the Midtown Existing Conditions Survey was one of those implementation action items. So from the perspective of the Urban Renewal Authority, completing an existing conditions survey is kind of the first step in the redevelopment process. What it does is it documents existing conditions of blight in order to provide evidence to create an urban renewal plan according to Colorado urban renewal law. So step one, we've already completed with the existing conditions survey, and then step two, then the city council will have the opportunity to decide whether or not to make an urban renewal plan for the corridor. After that, by creating the urban renewal plan, that would then enable the Urban Renewal Authority to utilize tax increment financing, or TIF, that will be able to help projects redevelop and pay for public improvements, which then leads to the final step of a revitalized and improved corridor. So the existing conditions study is another name for a blight study, and the purpose behind it is to inventory, assess, and document existing conditions of blight within a defined area. The existing conditions of blight are both visual and non-visual observations. So visual meaning things that are out there when you're on the field, so the look of the buildings, the street quality, things of that nature, as well as the non-visual observations that we've collected, which include things that you don't necessarily see but do contribute to blight, like traffic data and storm drainage issues, things of that nature. After the blighted conditions within the corridor are documented, they're assessed according to Colorado urban renewal law, and the urban renewal law identifies 11 factors of blight, of which 4 need to be present in order to declare an area blighted and establish an urban renewal plan. So once those once the existing conditions are documented, then that survey provides evidence to the urban renewal plan documenting that it is a blighted area, that an urban renewal plan can be established in order to enable TIF. So the Midtown redevelopment study included the entire commercial corridor, starting, as I said, up at Prospect down south of Harmony. I'm going to change the map a little here. So back in 2007, the city completed an existing condition survey for Foothills Mall, which is the blue portion that's left over there. And then in 2008, an existing condition survey was completed for the Prospect South, which is the blue area to the north. So since those two areas were recently studied, the focus of this effort, which was initiated in February, concentrated on the area that's left over in red. So the area in red was the main focus of our field investigations, but then we also went back out to Prospect South and to Foothills Mall just to do a double check of the existing conditions and verify that those two areas are still in fact blighted according to the law. So this portion that's left over on this map was the red portion from the other side. So this is what was studied in the Midtown Existing Condition Survey. And because of the size of the study area, what we did as staff was divided into 3 study sections. Section 1 begins where the Prospect South survey area ends and continued on to Drake. Section 2 was from Drake to Horsetooth, and then Section 3 was from Horsetooth down to Fairway Lane, just south of Harmony Road. And what we did for our field investigation is went out and we walked the area one study section at a time, and we would take photos whenever an existing condition of blight was seen. And as I mentioned, the Colorado Urban Renewal Law identifies 11 blight factors, 4 of which need to be present, but based on our examination of the area, we have found these 7 blight factors to be evident in the Midtown study area. So they include defective or inadequate street layout, deteriorated street pavement, deteriorated site and other improvements, things of that nature. And so the bulk of the existing conditions report is really found in the appendix, and so I definitely encourage you all to download that if you get a chance and take a look at what we found out there. So in Appendix A, what we did is we printed out thumbnail-sized photos of everything that we documented, and they're separated by study section. And so they're all numbered in order, and you can see, just different photos, things like, street pavement that's coming up and deteriorating or rutted, deteriorating buildings, deteriorated curbs and sidewalks that are broken. All of these things are factors and conditions of blight that contribute to the deterioration of the area. Also, I know this is too small to read, but we're just kind of putting it up here as an example. This is how we have documented and recorded what each of those photos corresponds to as far as the blight factors and the conditions. So each of those photos is numbered, and then on the left there, by photo, you can go straight across, and we've marked which condition that photo corresponds to, so you can see exactly how the two correlate. And then finally, there are maps that show where the location of each of those photos are. So you can see what the photo is, you can look up and see what condition or factor of blight it corresponds to, and then look at the map and see exactly where it was within the corridor. As I mentioned, in addition to the visual observations of blight, we also collaborated with our other city departments to find some other data that contributes to the existing condition survey. One of those was nuisance code violations that our neighborhood services department administers. We found between 1999 and 2010, there were 535 code violations. These include things like excessive weeds and rubbish, inoperable motor vehicles, unshoveled sidewalks, things like that. In addition, we also looked at traffic data and found that the major intersections along College Avenue, so College and Horsetooth, Harmony, Drake, and Prospect, are all functioning at a level of C or D, as well as when you average those intersections all together, you get a total of 33 average accidents per year. In addition, one of the other major conditions that we wanted to look at was storm drainage issues. So with input from our utility stormwater department, we identified on a map in the report some kind of key locations and issues that there are, the most notable being the Spring Creek floodplain or floodway that runs across College just south of Prospect. In addition, there are several kind of surface flooding issues along College Avenue, and then a couple ditch crossings that could be a challenge to redevelopment in the future. So just kind of identifying what's out there, what's going on in the corridor, what are the challenge and opportunity sites. So finally, we have the draft report complete. As I said, it's on the website to download. We have a few copies here too if you want to take a look. But we're going to be presenting it at a public open house on April 20th. So we'll have poster boards, and staff will be on hand to answer any questions, and it's just an open house, so come in and whenever you feel like and ask us questions if you have any concerns. And then we will be bringing the existing conditions survey for Midtown, as well as the update to the Prospect South and Foothills Mall existing condition surveys to City Council at a work session on April 26th. After that, if we need to make any revisions to the report, we'll be doing that, and then we'll be bringing it back to City Council on May 17th, and that will be where they have the opportunity to declare the area blight and refer an urban renewal plan for the entire corridor to the taxing entities, which are the county and Poudre School District, as well as referring it to Planning and Zoning Board for a recommendation, which then, just following the timeline, Planning and Zoning Board will review the urban renewal plan on the 16th, make a recommendation, and then final council consideration to adopt the plan will be on July 19th.
Thanks, Megan. So I'll just give a brief overview of the Prospect South area. As Megan mentioned, that existing condition survey was done in 2008. The impetus for that was the Capstone Student Housing Project that came forward in 2008. They were looking at a much larger project at that time, and then, as we all know, the end of 2008, some of the financing on a lot of projects went by the wayside, and so they had, not completely been dormant, but they had been working on some of their stormwater and other improvements in the background for a while. So they've rekindled that project as of 2010, and in 2011 early they've submitted for their final development plan, and they're moving forward with the project. So we are bringing back Prospect South, and the area that I'm specifically speaking of is the top portion of the map you saw with Megan, but it's really highlighted here in the yellow boundary Prospect to the parcels that lead up to Whole Foods. It doesn't include Whole Foods, it's just north of that. So the area that we're talking about for the Prospect, or for Capstone, is this area here. A lot of you may be familiar with the project, but just to point it out in case those of you that aren't, back behind the Choice Center retail strip. At one point, their conceptual plans had included the retail strip with it, and now it doesn't. They're focusing basically on the land behind and going to provide a small amount of retail space within the development that would service the students that are within the project. So that's the area. What we're talking about right now is what's the right timing. And so with Capstone coming on board, they would like to begin construction in July. And with that, it's all the construction that needs to happen to prep the site. So all the infrastructure, any demolition that's needed, tree removal, that kind of thing that's associated with their development needs to occur at that time. And so with that being the timeline for the project, we're really bringing the urban renewal plan back, updating the existing conditions survey, as Megan already mentioned, and we're looking at bringing that to the URA board at the same time that we're talking about Midtown. So what we'd like to do, because it's an important first step to really the redevelopment of Midtown, is have a charrette with the property owners. There's a lot of interest in that corner to revitalize the gateway into CSU, the corner of Prospect and College on the southwest part. And so we're going to host a design charrette for those property owners that are interested in participating to see how can we collaborate? How can we assist you in what your intentional dreams are for your business, your property? How can we have that open conversation and really just drive home the intention of what an Urban Renewal Authority plan area is created for, and especially because Capstone really wants to be integrated into the greater purpose they plan on being being in that site for decades and servicing the students at CSU. And so we're really trying to take that proactive approach instead of being reactive and just seeing how can Prospect South really improve and take advantage of the tax increment financing clock that may be ticking away by the end of this year. So that's completely dependent on whether or not the URA board would like to do that, but that's what we're intending to bring forward as a suggestion and kick off the Midtown redevelopment area. So with that, and in continuation of plan areas that have already kind of gone before council, I'll kick it over to Josh Burke, so we'll talk to you about Foothills Mall.
So, as many of you know from the Midtown redevelopment study and from ongoing conversations, the city has been engaged with General Growth Properties, who currently owns the mall, for quite some time to try to develop a redevelopment plan and move forward a redevelopment of the mall. As has been stated, the corridor in its entirety, all of Midtown from Prospect really to Harmony, is the focus. And what we have is an opportunity right now, because we have some willing property owners, to look at 2 sub-areas within the corridor that are ready to move forward. I do want to say, before I kind of dive into an update on the mall, we would be more than happy to have more than 2 areas. So if you control property in the area and you have interest in doing redevelopment, we'd love to talk with you about your own timeline, as well as what your plans are and how what hopefully will happen with City Council and URA action later this summer, with the ability to bring TIF to bear by the end of the year, the ability to really start having at least one major tool in our toolkit to kind of assist us with the rest of the tools that we have in our toolkit for economic development to help make Midtown what it wants to be in the future. But by way of update in terms of Foothills Mall, we've had very, very positive progress with General Growth since they've emerged from bankruptcy. They've brought on a new CEO. He previously ran Vernado, which was a company that had a modestly sized mall portfolio, but mostly malls that are akin to Foothills. Malls that were ready to be either redeveloped and fixed, or malls that were ready to be divested from the portfolio. And he, as an individual leading that company, had quite a bit of success turning the vast majority of that portfolio around. And now that he's at General Growth, he's done the same thing. He's basically taken a look at the 180 assets that General Growth owns, declared some of them mainline stable assets, and identified about 42 that are opportunity assets. And Foothills is in that opportunities group, which will get special attention and will also receive a little bit different thought process than the way they're managing the rest of their portfolio. All indications are they're very, very excited about the redevelopment potentials at the mall. And in fact, we have formally entered into negotiations on what the redevelopment agreement will look like and the redevelopment plan are in preparation to bring something before council, likely later this summer, that council, obviously any action that we would take to provide assistance to Foothills is requires action by council, but we are in the process of working with them right now to understand what it'll take in order to lead to that redevelopment. So just to touch on kind of where we're headed, I think many of you know the Midtown redevelopment study contemplated 2 potential scenarios. Scenario 1 was preserving the interior nature of the mall, but significantly enhancing it. And scenario 2 was basically demolishing everything but the Sears and building an outdoor center. What Midtown redevelopment study told us is that we basically get the same gross leasable area, which means we have about the same capability of generating revenue out of the 2 scenarios. But scenario 2, where we demolish a lot of the building and replace it, was about 50% more expensive. So it doesn't take much sophisticated math, right, to understand that scenario 1 was the one that looked a lot more financially feasible. And anecdotally, from our conversations with the community, there's quite a strong preference for maintaining an interior mall in the northern Colorado region. It would set us apart from some of our competition, as well as provide an asset that some parts of the demographic really, really enjoy and want to see maintained. That being said, the plans that we're working on, hopefully it will be centered around a new anchor, as well as include some outdoor space and some outward facing space, and an opportunity to really create locations within the mall where both the indoor and the outdoor come together, specifically around the food court. So it's just a flavor of where we're headed. Obviously, because we're in negotiations, there's not a lot we can say in terms of details, but hopefully by this summer we'll have things that we can start to say publicly. It will be a phased process. It will likely be a 4-year process of redevelopment. It's a situation where you have a patient that's in ICU and you need to work on those things that are most critical first. And so it kind of creates more of a series path where it's decommissioning and closing down parts of the mall that no longer work, focusing the attention on those parts that do work, refreshing it, and then moving on to the more demolition and redevelopment of a perpendicular aisle. But some of those activities could start even yet this year, depending on how negotiations go. So great things to come. And like I said, we anticipate and we feel like we're still on track to have something to present to council in the way of a redevelopment plan and an assistance package, probably late summer, early fall at the latest, so that next year we can begin in earnest in that phase project. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Dush, and he'll talk about the new planning tool that we're looking at.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Like Mike had said earlier, it's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces, and I think that the topic that we're going to speak about today is one that many of us have had some informal discussions about. And so what we're calling it currently is the SFP, the Sustainable Flexible Planning Tool. And so you're wondering, what does that mean, and how are some of those things even compatible? And these are general ideas, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts, not too much. I also want to indicate that we're very early on in the process. This is actually an outcome of discussions that we've had with not only the Planning and Zoning Board, which incidentally this item is on their action plan, and annually we have a retreat with the Planning and Zoning Board, and this topic has been one that has come up a number of times. It also was a matter of discussion at the City Council discussions during the adoption of the Plan Fort Collins as it relates to infill development, redevelopment, and opportunities and how to build things. So I'm going to start off a little bit with a quote that I love. It's from Daniel Burnham, and he says the following. He says, "Make no little plans, for they don't have the fire to stir our blood." And to me, that always talks a little bit about the planning stages, and we've talked a little bit about those initially, because a lot of these studies that we've talked about, whether it's been Megan or Josh and Christina and Mike through the infill areas and the various different planning tools, we then need to have the ability to implement them. And that's exactly what this planning tool is designed to do. Infill development, as most of you know, is unlike greenfield development in a variety of different ways. There are many competing interests that can occur, whether it's from technical standpoints or between the various requirements that are associated in our development code. So what we're looking for is another option. So what we mean by sustainable, one thought occurred to me while I was listening to Megan talk a little bit about the blight study. And she was taking these pictures of these areas, and you see degradation of an area over time. And we have opportunities to not necessarily build what we want, 50 years from now, but at least what we can do is start to lay a foundation to allow for the development of a framework or the backbone infrastructure, the layout of streets, and make sure that utilities don't conflict with those, and perhaps allow for some interim type uses. So that's kind of what we mean by sustainable. Flexible, of course, with a prescriptive land use code like we have currently. One of those elements that we're looking at is how do we infuse some flexibility into that process, especially in these infill areas that are all unique. Unique insofar as their context, the existing conditions built around them, and again, we all want predictability, not only for the applicants, but then also for the neighbors, whether it's residents that live in the area or existing businesses that are associated with the redevelopment site. So one of the other issues that we're looking at, why do we need this tool? And I talked a little bit about that. I'm not really good with slides. I have a tendency to talk, so that's what I just did. So a lot of this I kind of went over. But, repetition is good. So I may repeat this a little bit. One of the key issues that we're seeing with a lot of these infill developments are modifications or variances. And what that does is it creates situations to where one perhaps, let's say a stormwater requirement and another utility requirement for, let's say, electric. they have certain design criteria, and with greenfield development, if you have vacant land and you're able to do it, everyone gets their own little slice. What we're running into internally are some of the competing interests among the varied sort of development codes that we have, and these result in technical and or non-technical modifications that we have. And so we need to take a look at those, and again, it's not as if we're wanting to diminish our built environment in any way. We're wanting to do just the opposite. Here in Fort Collins, we enjoy an extremely high quality of life, a great built environment. People want to be here, and we're going to try and raise that with this tool in these challenged sort of competing interest infill areas. And so that's what I mean by the second bullet. And then the constraints. Many of you know about the constraints, and again, you deal with them all the time. Some of the issues that we have with our level of service, an example with streets, is we don't want to forfeit what is a great looking built environment for the sake of meeting some sort of a, let's say, a level of service standard for traffic. There are many places around the country who have said, you know what, we're going to say that we want our built environment to look a different way. We want the streetscape to have a certain scale and a certain feel, and we also want that intensity. But some of the standards that we have in place could require to blow out streets and lose that sort of feel. We have an amazing opportunity. Helen Knucklebrink talked about the Mason Corridor. We have in place tools, whether they're the transit-oriented development overlay district, where we encourage that intensity and that density. Because we all know that transit doesn't work great unless you have people. And so these are some of the tools that we're having, but at the same time, we can't sacrifice what our built environment's going to look at for the sake of a metric. So here is kind of graphically depicted a little bit how the former development code that the city had was the Land Use Development Guidance System. And those of you that were here prior to 97 remember that. That was more of a not necessarily form-based, but it was a performance-measured sort of development tool. When the land use code came into play, that became very prescriptive. What it did is it gave a lot of certainty, but it also took away some flexibility in terms of how to do design. And so there we see the scale across the top of this graph showing flexible zoning, LDGS, prescriptive zoning on the right, and then the review process, again, in terms of the discretion and neighborhood input. With the LDGS, there was a different sort of neighborhood model as well. And so we're thinking we need to hit the sweet spot, right in that bullseye. And so we're looking for you to help us out with this. And the timing of this venue is great because, again, we've been working on this, doing a lot of research, starting to assemble the components of a draft ordinance. And shortly, you'll be receiving a document to help us out with that. So again, what is it and what is it not? This wouldn't be mandatory. This would be a voluntary sort of approach. It would look things in a more comprehensive plan development approach. Exactly what that looks like, we're noodling around a lot of different tools that we've seen in other communities and things that we've used here in Fort Collins in the past. There may be an element of performance-based. Defined location. That was a key element that we talked about. Not only, I remember that discussion vividly during the council discussion at a work session on Plan Fort Collins, but also we've been to the Planning Commission a couple of times, and their guidance to us has to say it's a defined location. These infill and redevelopment opportunities, where these constraints are most vivid. And so how to do that, we're looking for incentives. You know, there are the normal ones that we have in place currently, whether like in the TOD that I mentioned before, where there aren't any requirements for parking. But we're going to get into incentives a little bit more, so let me stick with the program here before I veer off again. Here's our initial, and this is, again, as I had said, this is, we're in the very initial stage. And so what we've tried to do is to take these different targeted activity centers that we've already spent a lot of time and research on, along with our redevelopment areas and our TOD overlay that I talked before. And as you start laying these on top of each other, you can kind of see what the affinities between these different study areas that we've had. And so these things are going to kind of lend themselves, along with some of these other blight studies that we're doing, to, again, hone in and find out where this tool is going to be most effective. And I'd also like to just point out that this effort is one that we're using a lot of the existing studies. We're inclusive of a lot of internal departments to make sure that we're not missing things, and coordinating very well to make sure that, again, we can implement what we're trying to do. So I talked about the incentives, and this is where we need some help from you. We've talked, again, I've spoken to some of you informally about what are some things to incentivize someone to use this new tool that we don't know yet, but we know that it's sustainable, it's flexible, and it's predictable. Some of the things that we've heard of is use flexibility. Right now, in the city of Fort Collins, you have your zone districts, and within those zone districts, you have your permitted uses. And there aren't any other methods by which you can get a use in a particular area, like in other communities that have, let's say, a planned unit development tool or a special use permit tool. So what we have currently in place is what's called the addition of a permitted use. And that's a process whereby you can add a use to an existing zone district with the approval of the Planning and Zoning Board. And so that process is relatively new. I think we've had it for just a bit over 3 years. But we're looking at incorporating that sort of use flexibility into the SFP at a scale that involves this planned development approach. Another thing we've heard is extending plan approval times. One thing that I've seen not only in this community but in other communities, when things are slower, plans, of course, or developments aren't being built as rapidly as they once were. And people are wanting to make sure that their entitlements are staying alive. So one possible incentive is to take a look at extending approvals for project development plans or final development plans. And again, these are just ideas that we're haven't completely vetted them, are trying to, again, engage you and get additional ideas. Funding, we've heard, well, are you going to stroke us a check? But a lot of that, I think, comes into the notion of the map that we had seen earlier, drawing upon these affinities of where are our targeted redevelopment areas? Are there opportunities to partner? We heard the mayor talk earlier about a partnership. And that's really what we're looking at trying to do through the tools that the city has and the development that the city wants to attain, and partner with the people that build it. And that's you folks in this room. So we're trying to find those affinities and build upon them. Also with fee delays, right now, we have our teeter fee, our transportation development review fee, we have our application fees, and so there may be an opportunity to take a look at the timing as to when all of those fees are due. And then density bonuses. This is not an uncommon sort of incentive that is used across the country to encourage things. And it fits nicely in with the major public infrastructure project that we're building, i.e. Mason Corridor. So again, aligning all of these different elements that we're the city working on to capitalize upon this large public infrastructure investment and to make sure that we prevent blight and do it in a way that's collaborative. So here's our next steps. And again, these dates are also subject to change. So we're currently researching. We're developing a model ordinance, or a draft ordinance, I should say. We're going to test it and refine it. We're going to take a look at some sites perhaps and see how would our existing code work, how would this tool work? And then we can kind of do a beta test to see what's not working, what is working, rather than develop a tool, apply it to a real world project that's going through the process and see issues. So we're going to try and do a beta test initially. And then we're looking for adoption around the July-August timeframe. What we're doing, again, we're trying to meet with folks informally. We're going to more formal things like this meeting, as well as other boards and commissions. And those of you that are wanting a presentation like this, contact me afterwards. I'd be happy to come and do this. I think the timing of this meeting was really good, because we're able to take advantage of the brain power and the expertise in this room and garner some input from you. So the survey that was handed out to you, please just take a couple of minutes, look at the questions, fill it out. If something strikes you later on that you forget when you're filling it out, feel free to give us a call at any time. Finishing up the next steps, I think I ended off on adoption. This sort of a planning tool would be a modification or a change to the land use code, so it would go to the Planning and Zoning Board and ultimately adopted by the City Council. And so, as I had mentioned briefly earlier, we're going through and meeting with the Planning and Zoning Board on a monthly basis, getting input from them, refining things, and we have a core team. Most of the members are in this room that are putting this together and really doing the major push-ups to assemble this document. And so there again, roughly July for P&Z and August for City Council. So that concludes my discussion of the SFP. And again, I'm batting clean up here in terms of the order, but leading off for the Q&A for everything. And so be happy to field any questions that you may have on this tool right now. And if I don't know it, we'll try to get you the answer.
Clint Skidcon with the Fort Collins Board of Realtors. Steve, related to this process that you've laid out for us here, how closely will this link up then with the discussions about development review fees that's already on the calendar with City Council?
What development review piece?
The development review fees, I believe that's scheduled.
Oh, I'm sorry, Clint. I misunderstood you. I thought you said development review piece.
Oh,
you're talking
fees.
development review fees.
Yeah,
I'm
will
sorry.
that link up with what you're talking here as far as opportunities in relation to how those fees might be defined, et cetera?
That's something that we hadn't considered. The development review fee study that you're referring to is really taking a look at how the city captures its fees. We're of the mindset to where we don't want to undercharge and we don't want to overcharge, and that's really what that fee study is looking at. What this was looking at in terms of fees, as I had indicated on the incentive, was really sort of a timing-based element. So that fee study that you're referring to it's related insofar as it would apply to the application as it would any other application. What this SFP is really looking at doing is creating a tool to implement the various codes and policies of the city.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So I think at this time, we'll just open it up to the group in general. If there are comments or questions for the entire presentation, anything that you've heard today, things that you're concerned about. It is important, again, to complete the survey as best that you can, and if not, then feel free to share your comments and questions with us. So does anybody have any comments and questions of today's presentation? Anything that you heard?
One for Helen. Is there anything happening with the discussion of the federal government that could pull the rug out from under the Mason Street corridor?
The recent near shutdown of the federal government, of course, gave us all a little bit of apoplexy to some degree. The funding for Mason Corridor was put in the 2009 presidential budget and has remained in there. So we aren't in the situation where we're trying to get it into the budget. It's already been budgeted. Barring any issues that can come up between now and when we sign the final grant agreement, which is anywhere from now to 6 months from now, we should be good to go. We're in much better stead than a lot of people because it is actually budgeted.
I just want to make a final comment. I feel really strongly about what's going on in the room and the engagement of people in this process. I can only speak to the experience that I've had working with the city over the last 20 years as a business owner on North College and trying to get something going. I think we are back at that crossroads. The fact that we have created a community that is now defined by its edges and we have infill going on. Those of us in the room here have a lot at stake. And if we don't engage in the process and work together on this partnership concept, and I believe that works really, really well, just using the North College model, it is what can happen. But personally, as mayor, I would expect the engagement of the business community in getting this done. And we got to hear from you with the good and the bad and the ugly that fits with it, because it's our livelihoods that are at stake and the community's future. I can't speak strongly enough on how I think that can work for all of us, and I want to hear your voice there. I think it's just really, really important.